Mr. Janeway, we've had third-party candidates before, but probably
In
none.
my state of New York, you have fourth and fifth party candidates.
Well, no, I'm talking about
Join the crowd.
the ones who have the effect that Mr. Wallace seems to be having in this election. How do you think he's going to affect the election nationwide?
It would appear to me that he's drawing votes from Humphrey right now, and that he hasn't peaked yet.
Now, most of the forecasters said before the conventions that he would probably draw
I'm not
votes.
a forecaster, and I didn't.
All right, but most of them did say that he would draw votes from Mr. Nixon or from the Republicans. Why do you think he is drawing votes from Mr. Humphrey more so than Mr. Nixon?
Well, I would have thought that it's because his issue is one that is particularly provocative to white factory workers, and they're normally inclined to be Democrats. Of course, if it develops that Wallace is hurting Humphrey more than Nixon, then it will develop that Nixon made a mistake in picking Agnew, that he could have picked someone less controversial.
How do you think the final outcome will come then, as far in relation to Mr. Wallace's candidacy? How do you think he will affect the final outcome?
The way it's going now, Wallace and Humphrey are in a very, very close contest.
Wallace and Humphrey are in a close contest. Where does that leave Mr. Nixon?
Well, Johnson's going to win the election. He's going to beat Humphrey.
I see.
Which, as they say in baseball, that means Nixon would come in on a squeeze play. No hits, one run, one error.
And it's Mr. Johnson and Mr. Wallace taking Mr. Humphrey out of the ball game, in your estimation?
Yeah.
Do you think that will hold true in the next 5 or 6 weeks through the end of the campaign?
I would think so. If Humphrey starts forging ahead, Johnson might come out for him, and that would knock him down again.
You think Mr. Johnson is trying to defeat Mr. Humphrey?
Well, I think Johnson's got an arrangement with Nixon which he thinks is to his interest.
That's interesting. Now, in the campaign...
The way the world works in an interesting way. That's why we historians have the most interesting job of all, as I try to explain in my Economics of Crisis.
I see. Now, Mr. Johnson has never been, or never described himself as a Nixon fan. In fact, many people say that he just doesn't like
He generally goes with his enemies. He runs away from his friends, especially those whom he feels he can control, and he dominates Humphrey. But the fact is that he's given Nixon a non-aggression pact. He's given Nixon an exemption which no other man, not just candidates for office, but writers, editors, telecasters, enjoys. Nixon's the only man in public life under no pressure to have a view on Vietnam. All he need say in response to a challenge is, the president himself has briefed me, and I don't want to say or do anything to disrupt the Paris peace talks, the Paris peace talks to permit the war to go on.
Why would Mr. Johnson want to see Mr. Nixon elected? Because he thinks he will carry out his policies more than Mr. Humphrey?
I don't think Johnson cares about his policies.
What does Johnson care about then?
His front and his rear, his face, and not getting investigated afterwards.
Would you care to make a prediction on the election results then? Do you think Mr. Nixon will win as it stands now?
I think I'll stand on that. I think Johnson will win the election by beating Humphrey. Nixon, therefore, will become the president by default.
In the campaigning around, Mr. Humphrey's running into a lot of demonstrators where Mr. Nixon is not. Why is that?
Well, the Humphrey candidacy is a divisive candidacy because Humphrey has not felt free to repudiate Johnson. This was a problem, of course, that perplexed Stevenson when he ran with the Korean War still on and Truman president.
Now, you have a book out...
The Economics of Crisis.
That's right. Now, you are also considered an economic expert and a political expert. How are economics going to play a part in this campaign this year?
You can't be a realistic student of the way the world works economically unless you show or understand yourself how economics get involved with politics. It would seem to me that people have money worries, and that's bad for the ends, just as it was bad for Nixon in 1960 when he was the candidate of the ends and didn't feel free to be independent of the administration, and people had money worries. And money today is costing more than people can afford to pay. And a major reason for that is that Johnson hasn't known how to end the war. And these money worries will, I think, add to the general irritation and to the desire for a change, and Humphrey is being victimized by that.